They thought their neighborhood was safe until the HOA patrol started crossing lines no one could ignore. Imagine waking up to strangers climbing over your fence, peering into your yard, and acting like they owned the place. For one family, this wasn't just a nuisance, it was an invasion. And when their quiet grandfather decided he'd had enough, he came up with a plan that no rule book could stop. What happens when the people meant to enforce order finally get a taste of their own medicine? Stay tuned, because this story doesn't end the way anyone expected. For years, the Johnson family believed they had found their perfect corner of peace. Their home sat on the edge of a quiet suburban community, tall oak trees shading the backyard, a white picket fence marking the boundary, and a wide porch where evenings were spent watching the sun dip low. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked picture perfect from the outside, the sort of place where everyone waved politely at each other, where lawns stayed manicured and streets stayed clean. But beneath that polished surface, control ran deep. The Homeowners Association prided itself on keeping the community uniform, a word that sounded harmless at first until residents began to realize what it really meant. Every flower planted, every decoration displayed, every minor change to a property was tracked and judged. Most people learned to comply quietly. Some shrugged and said it was just the price of living there. The Johnsons tried to keep their heads down. They weren't flashy, they weren't loud, and they never sought attention. What they wanted was simple: privacy, safety, and the right to enjoy the home they had worked so hard for. But not everyone saw it that way. The HOA patrol, a small group of board-appointed residents, took their job with unnerving seriousness. Instead of focusing on common areas or safety, they zeroed in on individual homes, sometimes stepping far beyond what anyone would call reasonable. At first, the Johnsons brushed it off. A notice about grass height here, a complaint about the color of the porch swing there. Annoying, yes, but manageable. Still, something about the way those patrol members lingered near their fence, peering in like watchdogs, felt unsettling. It was only a matter of time before this tension boiled over. And when the patrol decided that even the Johnsons' backyard wasn't off limits, the family's quiet life would shatter in a way no one expected. The Johnsons' troubles didn't explode all at once. Instead, they crept in slowly, like storm clouds rolling over an otherwise calm sky. At first, it was the letters. Small, neatly printed notices slipped into their mailbox with the HOA's letterhead stamped on top. Violation notice. Grass exceeding regulation length. Violation notice. Fence color does not match approved pallet. Violation notice. Porch furniture not compliant. Each one came with a fine, never enormous but enough to sting. $50 here, $75 there, climbing steadily into the hundreds. Most families in the neighborhood paid up, fearing bigger consequences if they resisted. But for the Johnsons, who prided themselves on keeping their home tidy and respectable, the accusations felt absurd. Their grass wasn't tall. Their fence wasn't peeling. Their porch swing, it was painted the same shade of white it had been since the day they bought the house. It became obvious quickly. This wasn't about rules. It was about targeting. The HOA patrol, 3 or 4 residents who strutted through the neighborhood with clipboards in hand, had zeroed in on the Johnson home. They paced slowly by the fence, peered through cracks in the wood, and scribbled notes with the determination of detectives solving a crime. Sometimes they didn't even bother to hide what they were doing. The Johnson children noticed it first catching the sight of neighbors standing by the corner of the yard, whispering into their phones, snapping photos of their backyard. The most unsettling moment came one morning when Grandpa, who often sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, spotted 2 patrol members leaning over the fence, trying to measure the height of the garden shed with a tape measure. When he shouted at them to stop, they simply walked off without a word, as if he were the one in the wrong. The letters became bolder after that. The HOA accused the family of keeping unapproved equipment in their yard, referring to nothing more than a small tool chest Grandpa had kept behind the shed for years. They claimed the family's bird feeder attracted pests. They even sent a warning about excessive porch gatherings, despite the Johnsons' idea of a party being nothing more than Sunday dinner with their relatives. Each letter came with a deadline. Each deadline came with threats of larger fines or worse legal action. The Johnsons felt trapped. How do you fight an organization that claims authority over every inch of your property? Neighbors whispered that it was best not to push back, that fighting the HOA only made things worse. But Grandpa wasn't wired to stay quiet. The patrol's behavior grew bolder, almost reckless. One afternoon, while the Johnsons were away at work, a neighbor spotted two HOA members climbing over the fence and snooping around the yard. By the time the family returned home, the evidence was gone, but the neighbor swore it happened. And sure enough, a fresh notice appeared the next morning. Unauthorized modifications detected in backyard area. Immediate correction required. That was the breaking point. Grandpa wasn't just irritated anymore. He was furious. He began documenting everything. He took photos of the yard, timestamped videos of the fence, and kept every single letter neatly filed in a folder marked HOA harassment. Still, the patrol didn't stop. In fact, the more he pushed back, the more invasive they became. It was as if they wanted to prove they had the power to break him. The tension in the Johnson household grew heavier by the day. Dinner conversations revolved around the HOA. Bills stacked up on the counter. Even the children began asking why strangers were always lurking around their yard. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about dignity, about the right to live in peace without feeling watched. And then came the night that changed everything. It was late, the house quiet except for the hum of the kitchen clock. Grandpa couldn't sleep, so he sat on the porch, the way he often did when his mind was restless. The moonlight stretched long shadows across the yard, and for a while it was peaceful. Then he heard it. The faint crunch of gravel, the rustle of feet moving where no one should be. At first he thought it was an animal, but then he saw them. Two silhouettes creeping along the fence line, their flashlights sweeping slowly across the yard. His heart pounded. He stayed perfectly still, watching as one of them placed a hand on the top of the fence and hoisted themselves over. The other followed. They were inside his yard. Again, every instinct in him screamed to shout, to confront them, to scare them off. But instead he stayed silent, gripping the arm of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. He watched as they moved across the yard, shining their lights over the shed, the bird feeder, even the swing set. They were looking for something, anything they could twist into another violation. When they finally left, slipping back over the fence and vanishing into the night, Grandpa sat frozen. His chest burned with anger, but beneath it was something sharper, resolve. Enough was enough. If the HOA patrol wanted to keep trespassing, they would find out the hard way that the Johnsons weren't going to be their easy target anymore. The very next day, he began working on a plan that was simple, legal, and most importantly, impossible to ignore. He knew the HOA wanted to make him feel powerless, so he decided to use the one thing he still had full control over, his own gate. With a little time, a few supplies, and a stubborn determination that only years of life experience could fuel, Grandpa began to prepare. The family didn't know exactly what he was building. They just saw him measuring wires, checking the latch, and working quietly every evening as the sun went down. What they didn't realize was that he was creating a trap, not out of violence, but out of sheer cleverness. Because the next time those patrol members thought about climbing over the Johnsons' fence, they were in for a shock. The night air was still heavy with that peculiar silence that comes just before a storm breaks. Grandpa sat in his usual spot on the porch, a glass of water at his side, his eyes fixed on the gate. He had been waiting for this moment for weeks, ever since he'd finished his project. By now, he knew the patrol's routine. They never showed their faces during the day anymore. They had grown bold in their secrecy, preferring to slip through shadows like burglars, as though their violations carried more weight when discovered under the cover of darkness. And sure enough, just past midnight, the sound returned, the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel, the hushed whisper of voices, too arrogant to imagine they might be caught. Grandpa didn't move. He sat like stone, every muscle taut, watching. Two figures emerged from the streetlight's dim halo, their flashlights off this time, as if stealth would excuse trespassing. They headed straight for the fence, their hands already reaching for the top. One boosted the other up, legs scrambling awkwardly until snap. The sound of their shoes hitting the grass echoed faintly in the night. The second followed, dropping down just a few feet from the bird feeder they'd condemned weeks ago. Grandpa's pulse thudded. This was it. The intruders made their way toward the gate, their movements clumsy in the dark. He could almost hear the smugness in their... In the months that followed, the story of the Johnson family spread far beyond their neighborhood. Friends told friends, relatives shared it at gatherings, and soon people in other HOA-controlled communities whispered it like a cautionary tale. Some laughed at the image of patrol members zapped by their own arrogance. Others found hope in knowing that resistance was possible, that no HOA, no matter how strict, was invincible. For the Johnsons, life slowly returned to normal. Family dinners once again filled the porch with laughter instead of tension. The children played in the yard without glancing nervously at the fence. And Grandpa? He remained the quiet guardian, never boastful, never seeking attention. He didn't need recognition. The satisfaction of protecting his family, of reclaiming their peace, was enough. But late at night, when the porch was quiet and the world seemed still, he would sometimes replay those moments in his mind. The trespassers' shocked expressions, the silence of the boardroom, when the evidence hit the table. The way neighbors rallied once the truth came to light. Those memories weren't just victories, they were reminders. Reminders that peace is never given freely. It is earned, defended, and protected. And so, the Johnson family's story stands as more than just a neighborhood dispute. It's a testament to resilience, to the courage of ordinary people standing against unjust power. It's a reminder that even when the odds feel stacked, even when the system feels immovable, change begins with one act of defiance, one refusal to bow. Because sometimes, the strongest walls aren't the fences around our yards. They're the convictions in our hearts, the unshakable belief that home should be a place of safety, not surveillance. And as for the HOA that once thought itself untouchable, its shadow still lingers, but its power is broken. The Johnsons' victory became the neighborhood's turning point. And long after the patrol disbanded and the board reshuffled, people still point to that moment the night the tide turned as proof that no authority is above accountability. So if you ever find yourself staring down a system that feels bigger than you, remember this: one porch light, one hidden camera, one clever plan. Sometimes that's all it takes to bring the powerful to their knees.